I am so excited about making this video today because we are going to show you how we built our raised garden bed veggie garden on our self-sufficient property in beautiful tropical Far North Queensland. Hi, I'm Debbie. Welcome to Vintage Food Farm. It is so low maintenance, it is so productive, and that is why I want to show you how we set up this veggie garden. We've now got it to the stage where we don't have to plant anything. Everything looks after itself, except for maybe some larger tomatoes. Even the carrots came up again this year, and I thought that we might have to replant them. So our garden is now at the point where everything regenerates itself. I do have to pull out a couple of weeds every now and then, but not many because I grow all the sawtooth coriander in order to keep the weeds down. This is the vegetable garden today. The first thing we did was when we moved into the property, we really had a good look at the layout of the land, literally. And we decided that we wanted the vegetable garden very close to the house, and we wanted it to be basically where we could sit and watch it grow. So we have our deck, or our veranda, I suppose you would call it, and then we put the veggie garden right in front. And we did this so that we could easily access vegetables. Usually I pick them in the day, but if I'm desperate and it's dark, I can easily walk out with a torch and pick some herbs or some veggies. And then we also knew at that point that we would put the chicken run at the back of the vegetable garden, which is still reasonably close to the house, but just far enough away that, you know, if there's any smells or snakes or anything like that, that it's not too close to the house. So you can see here the site that we decided on to put the vegetable garden in. It started off, it had a couple of trees and it had a papaya, and I think it had some perennial basil. So we cleared that all completely. We also cleared some guava trees, which was really sad, but we knew that we had guavas everywhere around the property, so it was just a case of time, and we could replant those from seed, which we did, and we now have heaps of guava. So Tim he cut it all down, and then he just used a rope and the ride-on lawnmower, and just moved it all down to our chipping pile down at the bottom of the block. And then eventually we got to that and we chipped it, and we used wood chip all around the property. So we measured up the area. We knew that we wanted grass in between the garden beds because that was the only thing that we would be able to maintain out here, where there are so many grass seeds and weed seeds floating around. And this way we knew we could get the hand mower in there and mow in between the garden beds. So we measured up, we worked out how many garden beds that we would need and how many would fit in this area. And then we ordered them to get made at a local steel fabricator. We used Andy's sheet metal in cans, and we knew that it would take a few weeks for them to be made because we wanted so many. So we ordered them and knew that they were on their way, and that's when we started to work on plants. We used a number of methods to grow plants for the vegetable garden. The first one was seeds. So I ordered a truckload of seeds. I got some for my birthday, and we got a heap of pots, just basically potted up a heap of seedlings. So you can see here we've got a ton of different things growing, ready for when the garden beds were ready to plant up. And we just did it on these plastic tables under the veranda. The reason we had to lift them up off the ground is because originally we put them just down on the concrete and the wallabies came and ate them all. So every time we tried something in this process, we learnt that the wallabies will eat everything if given the chance. From seed we grew 100 different things. We grew all of our herbs, so mint, basil, not our Asian herbs, mainly just sort of more like European, Italian type herbs. We grew dill, we grew vegetables like eggplants and carrots, and we grew asparagus from seed. And one thing with asparagus, people say it takes like, years and years and years to get asparagus. We already have asparagus, and we did last year as well, that is really edible and beautiful. So don't not plant asparagus just because people say it takes so long until you get asparagus, because it's actually really quick. And we grew onions, we grew spring onions. Everything that we saw at the online seed shop we bought, and we planted that all up. The other thing that we did is because we knew, well, we didn't know how to grow anything in the tropics at that point, but we knew that at the local produce market, at Rusty's markets, that they had a lot of stuff there, and that was more the Asian type vegetables that was grown locally. So we knew that it could be grown. So I went to Rusty's and I bought a whole lot of stuff. I bought lots of herbs. I bought holy basil, Thai basil, lemon basil. I bought betel leaf, I bought kangkong, I bought Tongan spinach, and we proceeded to put all of those sort of more Asian greens and Asian herbs into jars of water so that they would strike roots and then we could plant them. And that was so successful. We just have so much of that sort of produce available all year. And it's now starting, for instance, the kangkong, we planted one lot and it's now in 3 or 4 different locations because it either drops down and grows roots or it seeds and comes up somewhere else. So yeah, first was seeds, then we did the Rusty's run and got as many herbs and vegetables and greens that we could find, and we put those in water to strike. And the other thing that we did was things like pumpkins and papaya. So we already had some pumpkins from a friend and we'd gotten the seeds from those. They're the grandma pumpkins, so we knew that they were really good. So we planted up a heap of pumpkin seeds. We bought a skyberry papaya and we got the seeds out of that and we planted up a heap of papaya. You can see here, this is a table with just jars of stuff growing. So the way that we did say spring onions, we did in 2 different ways. We had the seeds growing, but because obviously we had no fruit or vegetables at that time, we were also buying spring onions mainly from the market. So every time I would buy the spring onions, I would cut the tops off and use them to cook with, and then I would chuck the bottoms into a jar of water just to get the roots going, and then I would have it ready for when the vegetable gardens were ready to plant up. So it was just a case of spending a few weeks collecting seeds, buying seeds, collecting cuttings. So our garden beds were on the way and we had all of our fruit and vegetables and herbs planted up so that they were growing. We had a heap of tomatoes that we planted, but they actually developed too quickly for us to replant them into the garden. So basically we grew these tomatoes in pots, had a heap of tomatoes just from growing them in pots. It was very exciting. And I took the seeds from those tomatoes and then planted them into the vegetable garden when the vegetable garden came. And they were all, like old heritage breeds, so they were all true to seed. So I knew that they would regrow from the seeds. So we had our garden beds ordered. We had all of our herbs and vegetables and fruit growing, ready to be planted out. So the next thing that we did was we started to investigate soil and what sort of soil we would use. And we visited a couple of different landscape suppliers around town, but we ended up really, really excited about mill mud. And we'd never heard of mill mud before. Someone happened to mention it and say that you could mix it with other soils. But once we spoke to this great landscaping place in town, we realised that we shouldn't be mixing mill mud with anything. We should be just filling our garden beds with this beautiful, nutritious mill mud. So we ordered that mill mud to be delivered. It cost a lot to get it delivered because they had to come all the way up the range and we needed 2 really big loads, but still really, really great value for what we got compared to getting sort of garden soil mixed with compost. So the next thing that happened was Andy rang us and said the garden beds were ready, so we were very excited. Tim and Howard hired a truck just to keep the cost down, and they went and picked up the garden beds. I think they had to do it in 2 lots, I'm not sure. I think it was 2 trips. So that was a big day's work, but it saved us a lot of money on delivery. And even though they're bulky, they were still quite light. One at a time, lifted them out and took them over to the general area of where we were going to set up the garden. So once we had the garden beds here, we got out the tape measure and we laid the whole garden out. We looked at the spacing, we looked at making sure the mower could get through, all that sort of stuff, and also visually how we wanted it to be. So we designed it so that we had the higher beds around the outside of the garden, and then we had the lower beds which we were then putting rebar into to make arches. And then the rebar arrived, so we got that delivered from a hardware store. And we got enough rebar so that we could do two large rows of arches in order to get that vertical growing space for things like beans and snow peas and tomatoes and cucamelons and anything else that wanted to climb. Bitter melon we were going to do on these arches, and that's rebar arch, and it's worked really, really well. It was heavy, but it's actually quite easy to set up rather than building any sort of trellis or anything like that, and it will last for years and years and years because it's rebar. So we'd laid out the garden beds and we had the rebar at the side, and the next thing we had to do was to fill the garden beds and set up the garden completely. So we hired a bobcat. So we measured up and we laid out the garden beds exactly where we wanted them, and then we moved them aside so that we could then get the bobcat in with the mill mud to fill them. So as we went, we would take away a few, make a path for the bobcat. Tim would then bring the mill mud in and fill the garden bed. And then as he moved the bobcat out, we would put another garden bed back in, and then he would fill that. So basically, we just laid it all out, moved the edges away, filled the middle, and then worked backwards so that we could get the bobcat in to fill it. When we were filling with the bobcat, we overfilled. We went right up above the level of the garden bed, and then either Howard, our son, would stomp it down as hard as he could, or Tim would press it down with the bobcat. And the reason we did that is because we have a chipper, and there was a lot of dead wood everywhere. We chipped a truckload of wood chip, and we laid that in the bottom of the garden beds. So we knew that we were going to have sinkage, which is normal with raised garden beds anyway, but we just wanted to reduce the amount as much as we could. We used the wood chip to just reduce the amount of soil or mill mud that we would need in the gardens, and that would break down over time and become the amazing stuff that we've got in there now, which is filled with worms and really nutritious for our plants. So then we had all of our garden beds filled with soil. The next thing that we had to do was to put the rebar arches in. So we put those in. You can see Tim's like anchoring them down here. We actually cut the bottom off the rebar a little bit so that they were high enough that I could actually reach to harvest whatever it was that was growing there. So if we just used the full sheet of rebar, it would have been too high for me to reach tomatoes and cucamelons and things that are small. So we cut a couple of squares off, and then we've used that as the arch to grow our climbing plants on. The next thing that we did was we started to plant. So all of the seedlings and all of the things that I'd struck roots on and everything, I put on top of the garden beds where I wanted. It took me a few days to work out exactly where everything was going to go. I didn't really have a plan at that stage, so I just put pots on top everywhere. Then if it didn't work, I'd shuffle it around a little bit depending on where it was and what it needed, and then basically just went from bed to bed and planted whatever pots were sitting on top of that bed. And then the magic happened. It just started to grow like crazy. We could not believe it. It was only a couple of months until we were harvesting our own herbs and a lot of the leafy greens. We could see the carrots coming up. We could see so much happening every day. It was just so exciting. I will never forget how cool it was. This garden has become such a part of our lifestyle. I can't even remember what it was like to not be able to walk out and pick fresh fruit and herbs and vegetables. So once we had planted out everything, something terrible happened. We had already put a fence around the perimeter of the block, which we got a local contractor to do. So we sort of thought, are the wallabies really going to get in and eat all the herbs and vegetables that we've just planted? And guess what? They did. So we came out one morning and the whole garden was just munched on everywhere. Like, it was virtually leveled. So we learnt very quickly that we needed to put a second fence just around the vegetable garden, and then we needed to do it in chicken wire so that it was a much smaller hole, because we knew that the wallabies had gotten through the dog wire that the main fence is made out of. So we didn't let it get us down. We knew we could start again. A lot of the stuff could still be saved, and we had seeds, so we just went into damage control. We went and got an old gate from a Facebook marketplace. We went and got some chicken wire and some poles, and we didn't even know how to build a fence, so we did a lot of YouTubing to work out how to build a fence. So we got some poles, we got different brackets that we could attach to the poles to make supports for the poles. We bought some concrete mix, and we proceeded to build a not perfect but very functional fence around the veggie garden. And then as soon as we did that and we replanted what had been eaten, again, it just went nuts. And we had tomatoes and we had carrots and we had all the basil and all the sawtooth coriander and all this food really fresh right at our doorstep. And the whole time we knew that we wanted to make it easy. We didn't want to be planting up a vegetable garden every year. We wanted to plant so that it would self-propagate over time and develop and turn into this amazing garden that it is today. As time went on, we really refined what we would use and what we wouldn't use, and what would grow well and what wouldn't grow well. So things like the tree lettuce, we didn't plant that until, probably a year into the garden, because I didn't know about it, and I'd sort of heard about it somewhere, but I didn't realise how amazing that was going to be. So as time goes on, we've introduced things like Cape gooseberries and Okinawa spinach and longevity spinach, and just all these sort of permaculture-y tropical vegetables that I'd never heard of, and now we absolutely love. The other thing that happened was we got chickens. And to be honest, when I first planted the vegetable garden, I knew we were going to get chickens, and we sort of had chickens very soon after we planted up the vegetable garden, but I never really thought through how much we could grow in order to feed these chickens and get us super eggs and reduce the cost of those eggs. So that also became a big focus. We pretty soon realised that this is a very big vegetable garden. It produces so much food, more than we can possibly ever eat, even when we're giving it away. So then we realised that we could allocate quite a big amount of that garden to things that the chickens would eat. And because it's in the garden, they can't get to it and eat it before it's grown. And that is just a really effective way of producing really good quality eggs really cheap. The reason we put the chicken run behind the vegetable garden is so that when I'm working in the vegetable garden, or when I'm walking around and picking dinner or lunch or whatever it is, I can just pick some tree lettuce or pick some sweet potato leaves, whatever it is that the wing beans, whatever the chickens eat, and I can just, whatever's excess, I just pick some and chuck it over the fence, and they will literally run around the fence as I move around the vegetable garden, waiting for me to throw something over to them. It's very cute. Another thing that we introduced over time was things like blueberries and native raspberries. Native raspberries are incredible. They are very, very prickly, so they're not a nice plant to work with. You need to wear gloves and they grow so fast that they grow over the edge of the garden bed. So in order to mow, we really need to keep them cut back. But having said all of that, the amount of fruit that we get from the native raspberries is just incredible. I cut them down to the ground probably 3 months ago, and they're already, I'll show you, they are already completely out of control. We're going to get so much fruit this year from that. The other thing that we had to set up was irrigation. So we've got rainwater tanks and we have bore water. We decided to run the veggie garden off of the bore water. The reason we decided on bore water is because we didn't know how long 4 tanks of rainwater would last us. It turns out it lasts very easily, so that didn't matter. Because we travel overseas and we love to, go to different countries and eat different foods and all that sort of thing, we can do that and not have to worry about the garden not being watered. I can actually automatically turn it on from Vietnam, which I did. We actually reduced it from 2 sprinklers down to 1 sprinkler, and that does the whole garden whenever we need it. So in the wet season we don't use it at all, obviously, because it's raining all the time. We later got to the point where we wanted to put timers on as well, which we did, and that works fantastically. I'll show you. So you can see here we've got the original tap. We've actually got 2 taps there, but that's the 1 tap that's then turned into 4 taps, and then we've got the 2 timers on there as well, which is all hosed up to these sprinklers on top of the archway. I'll just turn it on so that you can see. So this is obviously has a timer on it, so it comes on automatically, but also you can just press the button and that waters the whole vegetable garden. And I'll just turn that off again quickly because it's the wet season and we do not need to water the garden. So along the way we learned things. We learned that if we planted papaya in the middle of the garden beds, it created a bit of dapple shade, which really helped the plants in this intense sun. And it also, when the roots of the papaya grow, they actually help to fill up the garden bed so that we don't have to top it up. I think you would have to live in an area that has a lot of sun to be able to put that much shade over a raised vegetable garden, but it really works in the tropics. We knew that we did not want to be slaves to the garden. We knew that we had to design it so that there was minimal work, and we're so happy with the way we did it. We made sure that we had grass on the ground around the beds so that we didn't want to use any chemicals for poisoning weeds. We didn't want to be pulling weeds out. And honestly, up here stuff grows so fast, you could never maintain it. So we're really happy we used the grass on the bottom. So when we ordered the garden beds, we made sure that we got them a little bit higher than a standard garden bed, which I'm really happy with because it's so easy and relaxing to be picking fruit and vegetables and that from the garden. We're really happy that we used grass. It was a bit muddy to start with, and there are still some places where it is muddy, but as the grass gets thicker and thicker and thicker, the surface is much nicer to walk on, and we're not having to use any chemicals to kill weeds or having to pull weeds out, because that just would have been undoable. There is no way we would have been able to maintain. There's so many grass seeds and weed seeds here that it would have just gone to rubbish straight away. We are glad that we put the fence up because now the chickens are here as well. It's not just the wallabies. The chickens, when we let them in there, which we do sometimes to eat some bugs, they cause a lot of damage very quickly. So we only let them in every now and then to keep the grasshoppers down. You certainly could not let the chickens have free range in that veggie garden or it would all be gone. The other thing that we're doing a lot of is using the fence as vertical growing space. So I've also got pumpkins and yams and wing beans and passion fruits growing on that fence. So as well as protecting the garden from the chickens and the wallabies, it's also metres and metres and metres of extra vertical growing space, which is working out really great. So that's it. That's how we set up our veggie garden. It was a lot of hard work, but I'm really proud of how it's worked out and how low maintenance it is. It was expensive as well, the cost of the garden beds and the fencing, but we are saving so much money now and will do for years to come by growing our own fresh tropical produce. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really loved showing you how we built our vegetable garden. If you feel like it, and only if you feel like it, like and subscribe. But most importantly, stay calm in the farm.